Hello everyone and welcome to the Melbourne Traditionalist episode 8. I'm Mark Moncrief from the Melbourne Traditionalists and I have with me David Hiscock from XYZ. How are you, David?
Very good, Mark. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Now, I understand that there's a second documentary about Adam Goodes.
Yes, just because one act of beating us over the head with a cricket bat just wasn't enough. Stan Grant made a documentary about Adam Goodes. And, Adam Goodes is the second biggest wanker in Australia, and Stan Grant is the biggest wanker in Australia. So whatever genius came up with putting them both together to make a movie, it was probably Stan Grant. It's just guaranteed for failure. You know that all the lefties are going to love it, and everybody else is just going to be like, what a bunch of dickheads, you know.
I'm just stunned that within, a month or 2 months, there's been 2 documentaries on Adam Goodes.
Yes.
And when was this saga? This was like 5 years ago.
Yes. Well, what's important to understand is that the parasitical elite want to make sure that they control the narrative about what actually happened to Adam Goodes. Because Adam Goodes was a cheat. He was a bully.
Yeah, I mean, he was a great player. He was two times Brownlow medal, which is the best award you can get in Australian football.
Yes, and when he played in a state game, like I saw a State of Origin match.
Yep.
Adam Goodes was far and away the best player. So this was a match with like all the best football players all across Australia. Adam Goodes was far and away the best player on the ground.
Yep.
So that tells how good a player he was.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a cheat. He was a bully.
Yep.
He became a social justice warrior, and he was aggressive to fans in ways that
Sorry. You just said he became a social justice warrior.
Oh.
And you said that he was a bully and a cheat. How do those things go together?
Yeah, I guess I repeat myself.
Yeah.
And so naturally we all started booing him. And we booed him quite rightly into retirement.
Yeah. Well, as someone pointed out to me, no one booed him for his first 300 games.
That's right. Funny that, isn't it? Yeah. And so the AFL and the establishment want to make sure that they control the narrative about what happened, because this was just yet another case of regular Australians standing up and saying, we're not going to take this rubbish and we're going to make it very clear what we think of you. And so now that it's a few years afterwards, they're just pumping out the propaganda. And it doesn't matter that nobody wants to see this latest documentary. Mm-hmm. They'll show this documentary in schools. And they'll show it for the next 20 years, and they'll make sure that every school kid in Australia gets fed this information. What's important to know is at the Melbourne Film Festival, there was a 10-minute standing ovation, and we both went to the same place. In Soviet Melbourne, nobody wants to be the first person to stop clapping. They get shot.
Yeah, exactly. You told me that before we started, and I was like, that was exactly the first thing that came into my mind. Yeah. Exactly the same thing. Yeah. Nobody wants to be the first to stop clapping. Yeah,
it was like after the gay marriage vote.
Yep.
And everybody still had their the rainbow filter on their Facebook profile, and nobody wanted to be the first one to take that down. I think they even wrote articles saying, "Oh, is it okay to take down my Facebook filter now?" But the point is that
talk about the hive mind.
Yeah, that's it. And so apparently this film has gone off at the Cinema Nova, which is Comedy Central, right next to Melbourne University. Mm-hmm. But nobody else in Australia wants to actually go see the movie. So what this tells us is that the establishment elite, the communist social justice warrior class, the Australian filmmakers, the Australian film industry, they're a tiny, unrepresentative clique. Mm-hmm. And they hate everything that regular Australians actually stand for.
Yes.
But they're the ones who control the narrative, and so they will just keep pumping this out. Yeah. But it has made my morning just to know that it went so terribly. Every time we get to poke them in the eye, it just makes it a little bit better.
Yeah, it does feel good, doesn't it?
Yeah,
it does. Now, our main topic for today, because we were talking about it earlier off air, is the urban sprawl.
Yeah, Melbourne is too big.
Yeah, Melbourne is enormous. But as I was saying, I'll start off with this story. When I was in the Army Reserve in the early 1990s, there was a British officer who came over here, and he served with the Australian Army. And he was asked, what do you think of Melbourne? And he says, it's a great city, but it's just too big.
It was in the 1990s.
And that was in the 1990s. So that's a quarter of a century ago.
Yep.
And it's just gotten bigger. And I recently wrote an article, 11 million Victorians, because the state government this year has commissioned a report, and it's online. You can go and check it out. It says by 2056 there will be 11 million people. So today there are 6 million. When I was born in 1970, there were 3 million.
Yeah.
So we've doubled, and now they're planning to double again. Now, the one thing we know about population predictions in Australia is that they are always wrong. They are always underrepresented. Because we were told that, I think by 2030, we would have 25 million people.
Yep.
And we have 25 million people today.
Yes.
Right, last year, I think, 2018. So we always know that these are wrong, that they just pump people in. So by 2056, we will have much more than 11 million people, and 10 million of those will be living in Melbourne.
Wow.
Because most people move to Melbourne or Sydney when they come to Australia.
Yes.
Right? And in fact, cities like Adelaide are becoming smaller.
Right, people are leaving Adelaide.
People are leaving Adelaide, right? Because that's how badly the state is run. And
do they have no coal-fired power stations there now?
No, they don't. They get all their energy from us, and we're running out of power as well. So exactly how these, obviously everyone's going to. I don't know how everyone's going to get their energy.
Oh, they're not.
Yeah, if things continue as they are, it's just getting worse and worse. But if we have 10 million people, then we'll have Geelong will be part of Melbourne.
Yes.
Ballarat will be part of Melbourne. Warragul will be part of Melbourne. Seymour will be part of Melbourne. It's just astonishing.
It's crazy because when I was a kid in the 80s, when we would go to Lake Mountain to the snow, we would drive through Lilydale and it was a town. And I was told, one day the houses will go all the way out to here. And I remember that it seemed to be a lefty concern, urban sprawl.
Yeah.
They didn't want urban sprawl.
That's right. Yeah. They used to talk about how bad it was and so forth. But unfortunately, they got on the wrong bandwagon because it was part of their, hey, we don't like suburban Australia.
Yes.
And we don't like suburban people. We don't like ordinary people. We don't like the working class. We don't like the middle class. They should just live in tiny little houses.
Yes.
Well,
so somebody like Harry Triggerbuff, somebody like Harry Triggerbuff actually came to Australia, and he didn't like the fact that we all seemed to have our own cottages. He wanted us to all be apartment Australians.
That's right. He wanted us to live like Europe.
Yes.
Whereas in Europe they have to live like that because they don't have the space.
Yes. Yes. In 2000, I did a parliamentary internship on heritage listings. And that kind of went either way. That didn't necessarily divide down right or left.
Yeah.
But I remember interviewing a professor at Melbourne University who was talking about wanting to introduce a European model where there were several CBDs all over Australia.
Yep.
So all over, say, Melbourne.
Yep.
And their transport nodes and everybody lives in medium density housing in those areas. And that's what we're getting now.
Exactly. That is what's happening, isn't it?
I actually didn't mind that approach. I was like, well, if we just have like a regular natural population increase and Melbourne becomes just over the course of time just naturally becomes bigger.
Yep.
We can improve our infrastructure. We can have several ring roads, several ring rails. Why not just have all of them? It's not an either or. One great thing they could do is like build a tunnel between CityLink and the end of the Eastern Freeway. Oh, no, forget it. That'll never happen. I don't mind that, and I actually like skyscrapers as well. I've always been fascinated by skyscrapers. When I went to America, I went to New York City, and I loved it. And I loved the fact that here in Melbourne they were building skyscrapers. But what they've done is to just keep pumping people in.
Yep.
And B, just keep growing it out. Melbourne is basically becoming a cancer. Like the Gippsland and Melbourne, the Melbourne region, it's some of the most fertile land in the world.
Absolutely.
But we're building houses on it.
We're just building houses on it. Exactly right. Yeah, so we're destroying our own food production.
Yes.
And of course, then we have the problem with water.
Yes.
We've built the desalination plants, but apparently they're too expensive to run.
I love the fact that they built it.
So every state...
They don't actually have it. They're not actually running it here in
Victoria. Well, every state has at least one desalination plant. Some have two. But we have a drought.
Yes.
You would think that if we could just create fresh water, then we could just pump it out to the countryside and look after the farmers. But apparently, no, we can't do that. I'm not sure why, but apparently it's crazy. They say it's too expensive.
That's crazy because Israel is like if you look at photos from outer space, you see this strip of green through Israel, and part of that is from the Jordan River, but a lot of that is just from desalination plants. Mediterranean.
Yeah.
So they can do it.
Well, exactly right. They can do it.
Yeah.
You know, in fact, they're the world leaders.
Yes.
In desalination. But apparently we can't do it. And it's all a bit of a mystery to me. But I must say, I've never been a big fan of skyscrapers. And I mean, I've gone up to the observation decks and gone, oh wow, this is pretty amazing. And you can see so far, but I've never liked a skyscraper, and the skyscrapers they're too utilitarian.
Yeah, this is
they're not attractive at all.
Yes.
And in the old days, like the Empire State Building.
Yep.
The Empire State Building is an attractive building.
Yes.
Because when it was built, it was primarily of stone. And then in the 50s, they changed and they became glass. Technology improved and so forth. So now they're just boxes. But they've actually started to design some quite innovative ones that twist, ones that where the top looks bigger than the bottom and so forth. So I must say that is at least better than what we had. And some of them you go, oh wow, that's nice. Yeah.
Well, that's
of course at ground level it just makes everything concrete.
Yes, this is a really important thing. One of the reasons I love skyscrapers is I think, okay, if you're going to build a modern building, and you're going to knock something down old which has been there for maybe 100 years or so, then at least make it worth it. Don't build something that's 10 stories high or 3 or even 20. Build it 50 stories high to actually make it worth it. And
you see, I don't think that's worth it.
Oh well, from there, it's worth it if you make it beautiful. Like when you go,
even so, I still don't think it's worth it.
Okay.
There's a Johnny Depp movie. It's gone completely out of my mind now. It's about Jack the Ripper. From Hell.
I was going to say, I can't see Johnny Depp playing a character like that. Are you serious? Are you sure about that?
And when it was filmed in the 90s, it was filmed in Prague and Melbourne.
Oh yeah. Oh wow.
And the reason
did they use Burke Street and Collins Street?
Well, the reason that I don't know exactly where they filmed, but the reason that they used those two cities is because they were the best examples of Victorian architecture in the world.
Yes.
And what have we done? We've pulled it down and built bloody skyscrapers.
Well, I like the idea of keeping the beautiful stuff and the newer stuff, which is,
So we should have done what Paris did, which was
they built the whole CBD, a whole.
That's right. They kept the old Paris, and they actually said, "Hey, if you want to build a high rise, this is where you build it."
Yeah.
So they've got high rise buildings, but they've also got their classical architecture, which millions of people go to see every year.
Yeah.
And we could have done that as well, except we haven't. We've pulled down our Victorian architecture to build these monstrosities.
Yes. Well,
and many of them, as you point out, will last 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah. Well, I remember the way the Melbourne skyline used to look in the 90s and even the early 2000s, and I thought that was pretty special.
Yep.
I actually love the Rialto. I think it's a beautiful building. Like, they've made it big, and it was iconic.
And you see, the Rialto was built where there was a warehouse.
Yes.
So it wasn't for a factory. So
that's what I'm talking about. You don't knock down a beautiful old building to build a skyscraper. You knock down something which nobody really wants to look at anyway.
Yeah.
What they've done now is they have knocked down all that stuff, and they've basically made now in Melbourne a copy of the Rialto. It's a little bit bigger. It's like if you can tell somebody who doesn't quite have the skill who made the original Rialto.
Yeah.
But they've
the Rialto's on Collins Street. I'm thinking of the one across on South Bank.
Oh, the Eureka.
The Eureka.
Oh, I think that's a beautiful one as well.
Yeah. Sorry, continue with the Rialto.
Yeah. So it's like somebody's tried to make maybe a cross between the Eureka and the Rialto, and they've built it just in the northern part of Melbourne, just north of the rectangle. And I look at it and I'm like, okay, you've tried to make another Rialto and you've made it a bit bigger. Is that they've basically just made it a copy.
Yeah.
And there are all these other skyscrapers around, which, I like skyscrapers. I like the look of some of them, but with most of them there, I'm like, okay, you're trying to make Singapore or Hong Kong here.
Well, that's the thing. This is skyscrapers are not a Melbourne thing. They shouldn't be here. The first skyscraper in Melbourne was built in 1956.
Yes.
So before 1956, you couldn't build. I think it was 5 stories.
Yeah.
You couldn't build anything over that. And you'll notice that you'll see a lot of architecture in Melbourne, in the CBD, that is 5 stories high.
Yeah. Yeah.
But actually, that's still quite livable.
Yes.
And it's not out of character with the rest of the buildings around them.
I do love the old. There are those Facebook groups that have the old photos of Melbourne.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. And I remember, again, when I was a kid in the 80s, they used to call Victoria the Garden State.
Absolutely. And now we still have a lot of gardens, but it's just, I must say, I've driven in South Bank recently, and I was like, this is like I expect New York to be.
Yeah.
It's too much.
I've got to say, I liked the idea of making Melbourne like New York, but we haven't made it like New York. We've made it like Singapore, Beijing, or Hong Kong. And that gets to the crux of the matter for me, because if you look back at what was the motto after the Second World War for Australia, which was populate or perish.
Yep. Now it's populate and perish.
Yeah, well, the point of populate and perish was to say, well, we're an outpost of British civilization.
Yeah.
In Asia, surrounded by all these massive Asian countries.
Yeah.
We need a bigger population, otherwise we're going to be invaded by these Asian countries, by these massive Asian countries. So the policy for the last 30, 40 years has thus been to import millions of Asians into Australia.
Yeah.
So what's the point of populating or perish if we're just going to be invaded anyway?
Well,
we've invited the invaders in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, our own government is the general of the invasion.
Yes. Yeah.
That's why they don't oppose it, because they're in charge of it.
Yes.
But we are being invaded. And you see all these high-rises, and they're being built for foreigners.
Yeah, that's why we call the new ones, we call them apartment Australians.
Yeah.
Because they're coming over here and they're living like they did over there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It's just annoying. It's just, I want to use much stronger language than that.
I think we're making it quite clear. We'll say that we're a tad upset. I was actually at a gig on Saturday.
That's what I meant to say.
A tad upset. Yeah, we've got to keep our British stiff upper lips. I was at a gig on Saturday evening. A band called the Butterfly Effect. They're a band who they were quite big for Australian bands in the noughties.
Yep.
And I was into them from about 2001, And and the type of people who are into the Butterfly Effect, and I was this way, they're not just another band. Like, you love them and they're your favorite band.
Yeah.
So for me, that's what it was. And just to describe their music, they're heavy metal. So you've got this sort of tumult of the band, and then the singer sings like an angel over the top of it. And he sings about pain and struggle, but both in the way that the music is done and the way that he constructs the lyrics, there's always hope, and it's always about fighting through. Mm-hmm. And so that really spoke to me. Just, that was a time of my life where that was a really good kind of music to listen to. And I noticed that the people at the gig now, because I haven't seen them for a decade, the band broke up for a bit, they just got back. Yep. They seem to be about my vintage, or a little bit younger, and they all had a smile on their face, and I projected it a little bit, and because when I listened to the music, I was like, okay, it's like they're singing this, saying, okay, we're singing about some of the hard times, mm-hmm. but we beat it. Yep. And now we're just loving the music because it's great nostalgia and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Yep.
And so that was tremendous. And then there was one really key factor that I saw about the crowd that you just can't unsee. It was 99.9% white.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that, because yes. That's what I was expecting.
It was the ethno state.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was a reminder of, hey, even just almost 20 years ago, Melbourne still was white.
Yeah, that's the thing. People say, "Oh, there's no going back," but nearly all of these people have arrived in my lifetime. Why can't they leave in my lifetime?
Yes, it's not. You can't make the argument, oh, they've got generations worth of roots down there. Yeah. They're Australians. They're just as Australian as you.
Yeah.
Tell you what, within 10 seconds of stepping outside the forum, Indians everywhere.
It's getting bad, and sometimes I'm driving in the car and I just look out and I just scream. Sometimes it's silent.
Yeah, you got to be careful of it. Oh, you can scream at them.
Not at them. It's just at the situation, because in the end they're here because the government brought them here. They're not here because they chose to be. Right? I mean, obviously they did choose to come here, but that's because the government gave them the option.
Yes.
If they didn't have the option, they wouldn't be here.
Yeah. And here's a point as well. We make the argument that immigrants come here because they want to live in a country where they have opportunity, mm-hmm. with freedom, free market society, where they have more opportunities than what they did over there. But they're not coming to that kind of country. They're coming to a cultural Marxist country, where
that's right.
They're being used to basically keep the economy going to like basically artificially stimulate the building industry.
Yep.
And B, they're going to be used as sanctified victims, and they're going to be fed all this SJW propaganda, mm-hmm. This anti-white propaganda, to try to basically demonize white people, to poison them against the people who created the country. And C, their daughters will become fat lesbians, and their boys will become their sons will become soy boys.
Well, this is one of the reasons that I'm against immigration. It's not just bad for us; it's bad for them.
Yes, if this is a direct message to migrants coming to Australia.
Yeah.
In several generations' time, your grandchildren will not uphold your culture.
Not in several generations, in one generation.
Yeah.
The next. I noticed this particularly with the Asians. They come here and they're very based.
Yep.
Right. You can talk about any issue that you want,
and then they say, "Oh, you Aussies, you have no culture. You don't spend time with your family."
That's right.
Look at us 50 years ago, mate.
And then their generation, the children of that generation, of those immigrants, they'll be exactly the same as us.
Yeah.
They're like, I saw the oldies, and it's. Yeah. But really, they're so backwards and blah blah blah, and they're setting themselves up for a fall. Yeah. I mean, we've already suffered it.
That's it. Their grandkid. Just say you're an Indian.
That's one of the reasons why we keep needing immigrants, is they're not having grandchildren.
Well, yes.
Because they become like us. They're not racially like us.
Yes.
But they certainly step into the culture, and I think they're even more affected than we are.
Yes. Well, what you're saying here is that Australia, the way the system is designed, it's too expensive to have big families.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have people coming from countries where they have high birth rates,
Yep.
but then very quickly they reach the same birth rate as us.
Yep.
And so then the Australian population can't sustain itself.
Yep.
It can't grow without immigration.
That's right.
So what that's actually saying is that Australia and Western countries in general are a black hole for the rest of the population of the world.
Well, the entire Western world is a black hole because really we should be having our own babies.
Yes.
That should be the goal of every government,
Yeah.
to support social cohesion, to get men and women to marry, to have long-term relationships, to have lifelong marriage, and to have their own children, right? And our population would grow if every married couple had 3 children. That's all it takes, 3 children. It's not outrageous, right? But that's not enough. They can't do that. Instead, they have to bring in more and more people to fill the gap because they're completely destroying, on purpose, our social foundation. Now, you raise an interesting point, which I was also thinking about, which is that the building industry.
Yes.
You know, we think of the building industry as a positive thing, but it's actually, I'm starting to feel that it's a negative industry.
Yeah.
And that it destroys our past and it simply builds to import more people.
Yes.
And of course, when we have a recession or a depression, which is inevitable, this economic system can't go on, it's going to come to an end at some point. What's going to happen to those men? Right?
Yeah, and those men are the most vigorous of our people. Like, because you look at the building industry and it's still, like tradies, it's still mostly white men, and like bogan white men.
Yeah.
So like these are the kinds of guys who play football and fight, and will join the army. You know.
Yeah.
We are employing them in building the houses of the people who are here to replace us.
And once the economic system fails,
Yeah.
then what happens to them?
Well, the calculation.
You know,
is
in the old days, they worked in factories.
Yes. Yes.
And now those factories are in China.
Yes.
Or don't exist.
Yeah.
So this is a big issue for the future,
but it's not.
We shouldn't get into today. But
it's not a big issue for them. I think the calculation is that when the crash comes, as long as we are in the minority, the establishment will be okay. Because when the crash comes, all the cushions of the things that cushion what in any other country, like say, I don't know, Yugoslavia, would be things that would tear a country apart. When you take those cushions away, all of a sudden people are going to go very, very trouble very, very quickly. And I think that's a calculation that they make. It's like, okay, we know that this system is not sustainable.
Well, that's right. I think you're right. I think that they are pushing. That's why they're pushing immigration so hard. Is because when things collapse, they want us to be in such a bad position that we can't recover from it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a miscalculation on their part, because I think we can and will recover from it.
Yeah.
Well, I think we'll call it a day there.
Yeah.
Thank you, David. Where can people find out more about you?
Come to the XYZ, www.xyz.net.au.
And I'm Mark Moncrief, and you can catch more of my thoughts at Upon Hope, and just put that into your favourite search engine and you'll be able to find me. Thank you, and have a good day.